The spring sun filtered through the cherry blossoms lining the streets of Elmwood, a small coastal town in California. At 62, Alexander Harlan, a retired software mogul worth billions, strolled along the boardwalk overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He had sold his company 2 years earlier, after decades of relentless work that had built an empire but cost him everything else. His wife, Elena, had passed away from cancer 10 years ago, and their only son, Michael, had estranged himself after a bitter argument over Alexander's absence during Elena's final days. Now, Alexander lived in a sprawling oceanfront mansion that felt more like a museum than a home, silent, echoing, filled with artifacts of success, but devoid of life. He had come to Elmwood to escape the memories of San Francisco, where every corner reminded him of what he'd lost. The town was quiet this time of year, before the summer tourists arrived. Alexander walked daily, letting the salt air and rhythmic waves numb the regret that had become his constant companion. He donated anonymously to charities, funded scholarships, but it all felt distant, like throwing money into a void. That afternoon, as he passed the old community park near the beach, he noticed a man sitting on a weathered picnic table. The man was in his late 30s, ruggedly handsome with tousled dark hair and a day's stubble, wearing faded jeans and a threadbare jacket. Beside him was a teenage girl, about 15, with long auburn hair tied in a ponytail, sketching in a notebook. She wore an oversized hoodie and sneakers that had seen better days. They shared a paper bag. Inside, Alexander glimpsed a couple of apples and a loaf of bread. The man broke the bread in half, giving the larger piece to the girl. She smiled faintly, a tired but affectionate expression, and they ate in silence, watching the ocean. Something about the scene tugged at Alexander. It wasn't overt poverty. They looked clean, composed. But there was a quiet desperation in their posture, the way they conserved every bite. Curiosity drew him closer. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said casually. The man looked up, wary at first, then nodded. "Yeah, one of the best this year." The girl glanced at Alexander, her green eyes sharp and intelligent, before returning to her sketch, a detailed drawing of the crashing waves. "I'm Alexander," he continued, sitting on the opposite end of the table uninvited but not aggressively. "New in town, sort of. Just walking off lunch." The man hesitated, then extended a hand. "Ethan Brooks. This is my daughter, Sophia." "Nice to meet you both." Alexander nodded at the sketch. "That's impressive. You're quite the artist, Sophia." She blushed slightly. "Thanks. It's just practice." Ethan chuckled softly. "She's being modest. She's won a few local contests." They chatted lightly about the weather, the best spots for sunset views. Alexander learned they were locals, that Ethan had grown up in Elmwood. But as the conversation flowed, gaps appeared. No mention of a mother, no talk of home or work in the present tense. Eventually, Ethan sighed. "We should head out soon." "Got a long drive." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Drive? Where to?" Ethan exchanged a look with Sophia. "Just around. We're between places right now." The truth emerged gradually. Ethan had been a mechanic, owning a small garage in town. But when the economy dipped and big chain auto shops moved in, business dried up. He lost the garage, then the house when he couldn't keep up with payments after his wife, Sophia's mother, left them 5 years ago for someone else. She'd remarried and moved across the country, cutting ties. Ethan and Sophia had been living in their old van for months, parking in remote spots, using public facilities to stay clean. Sophia attended high school online when they had Wi-Fi, but it was inconsistent. "We're managing," Ethan said firmly, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "I've got interviews lined up. Something will come through." Sophia added quietly, "Dad's teaching me about engines. I help when I can." Alexander's heart ached in a way it hadn't in years. It reminded him of his own son at that age, bright, resilient, but scarred by family fractures. "Listen," he said carefully, "there's a diner just up the boardwalk. Best clam chowder on the coast. My treat. No strings, just good food and company." Ethan started to refuse, pride flashing in his eyes. But Sophia touched his arm.
Dad, I'm starving.
The bread was lunch. After a moment, Ethan nodded. All right. Thank you. The diner was cozy, with red vinyl booths and the smell of fresh seafood. Alexander ordered generously: chowder, fish and chips, salads, milkshakes for Sophia. As they ate, the story poured out more freely. Ethan had sacrificed everything for Sophia, turning down jobs out of town to keep her in familiar schools, even when it meant scraping by. Sophia dreamed of studying marine biology, inspired by the ocean, but college felt impossible without stability. I've applied for aid, Ethan said. But waiting lists are long, and with no fixed address. Alexander really listened. In his world, problems were solved with acquisitions or algorithms. But this was human, raw, unfixable by a check alone, yet perhaps changeable with the right leverage. Why help us? Ethan asked as they finished. Alexander thought of Elena, who had always urged him to be present, not just provident. Of Michael, whose last words had been, "You were never there when it mattered." Because I know what it's like to lose family, he said quietly, and to regret not doing more when I could. Let me help. Properly. He gave Ethan his card, plain, no company logo now that he was retired. Call me tomorrow. I have connections. Jobs, housing. No charity, just opportunities. Ethan stared at the card. Alexander Harlan? The Harlan who built Nexus software? Just Alex, he replied with a smile. That night, back in his mansion, Alexander couldn't settle. He paced the empty rooms, memories flooding back. He called old contacts until late, a friend who owned a chain of auto repair shops, another in real estate. Ethan called the next day, voice tentative. They met at a coffee shop. Alexander introduced him to Maria Gonzalez, his former HR director who'd relocated nearby. She ran a consulting firm now. Ethan, your skills are exactly what Harbor Auto Group needs, Maria said. Shop manager position, full benefits, relocation assistance if needed. Ethan's eyes widened. This is real. As for housing, Alexander had arranged a rental, a modest 3-bedroom cottage near the beach, owned by a trust he controlled anonymously. First year's rent covered as an employee incentive. Sophia could transfer to the local high school, with tutoring if needed. Ethan teared up. Why us? You don't know me. Because your daughter looks at you the way my son once did, Alexander admitted. Before I ruined it. And because second chances shouldn't be rare. The changes came swiftly. Ethan started work, excelling immediately. Sophia thrived in school, joining the art club and science programs. Alexander visited often not as a savior but as a friend, helping with homework, sharing meals. Months passed. Alexander reached out to Michael, tentatively at first. Letters, then calls. The estrangement began to thaw, inspired by Alexander's newfound involvement. One evening, at a barbecue in the cottage backyard, Sophia presented Alexander with a painting, the three of them on the beach, waves crashing, cherry blossoms in the background. You're like the grandfather I never had, she said shyly. Ethan clapped him on the back. You've given us more than a home. You've given us hope. Alexander looked out at the ocean, feeling whole for the first time in decades. No, he said. You gave me family again. Years later, Ethan rose to regional manager. Sophia earned a scholarship to study marine biology, interning at a lab Alexander quietly funded. The cottage became their permanent home. Alexander established the Elena Harlan Foundation, focusing on family support, job placement, housing bridges, counseling for estranged relatives. On the anniversary of that spring day, they gathered in the park. Sophia, now in college, sketched the scene. Ethan grilled burgers. Alexander smiled, thinking how one conversation on a picnic table had rebuilt not just their lives, but his own. True wealth, he realized, wasn't in code or companies. It was in connections rebuilt, one act of kindness at a time.